So I wanted to open things up and just kind of ask you, I noted the learning target for the day, and I wanted to see what you thought about today's target and how it went.
We're still a ways from the explicit notation, or the explicit equation. So we didn't quite get there yet on that one. The recursive equations, a lot of the kids are still reverting to that, which is fine. I wasn't surprised by that, but I think, and some are still struggling with making sense of that, but more are making sense of the recursive than the explicit.
So once again, I'm genuinely wondering about, do you believe that where they felt more at home was a more concrete representation for them, and the others were more abstract?
Okay, I'm going to stop for a second.
Yeah.
You're wondering, she's made a statement, is it through them? What through them? What do you think was getting them off base? You're going down to a thinking of the concrete to the abstract, and asking a question that kind of limits her thinking. She made powerful statements. She goes, when I asked through them, what do you think through them? Where do you think they're getting lost?
As the question asker, I create questions that really, I'm almost playing the role of student.
Mm-hmm.
I'm asking questions that maybe I don't understand, and I think that's an error.
Mm-hmm.
I need to ask questions, not that truly I'm wondering about, individually. I need to really be the role of the administrator who's trying to spark the thinking. And that's where the careful nature of the language and the question need to be. Because I was really curious about whether it was more concrete or more abstract. But that's Mike asking that question, not trying to get a broad response that will open up the door into Heidi's thinking.
My thinking is, I'm starting to see a through line between student learning and all the way through the organization. And what I mean is that if we believe that the people doing the thinking, talking, reading, writing, and the people doing the learning, that everybody at all levels has to be doing that. So if you thought kids who obviously at one moment when Heidi realized that them understanding the concept of a function was like, oops. And then you watch kids go into a work time, and those kids, even though we saw some behaviors because they didn't have an understanding, they still were staying knowing that their talk and their thinking was going to be to their learning. And they weren't going to Heidi and saying, here's the solution. And coming to this realization of that thinking can transform the whole system. And Amika's statement before about how that changed the way I thought about this was one of the most powerful statements I've ever heard in an educational experience, that changed your thinking of this relationship. Well, we can change the relationship kids have with their learning, with kids having with teachers having with administrators, and administrators having with central office. That once we change that to a thinking organization, that none of us are experts, but we learn together. At that point, that we'll truly get a place where we're going to meet the needs of all kids.
But the wrinkle that I walk away with, the challenge, is because you did everything in planning. It was all about planning and assessment of what your kids did the day before, and that led you to what you did today. And that's what I don't see in traditional teaching. And it's frustrating for me because we just move on. And that kid, that girl, would have been lost. And if that's my daughter, she's behind in math. So that was the sticking point. But I think it was Mike that kind of gave me a wrinkle on my head. He said, I've got all these teachers, how do I do this throughout the year? Because really it's about us going back to our building and moving people in instruction. So I started thinking about a PGO, or a way to work with our teachers that are ready to start having dialogue conversations that are not offensive. And I used your words, use their words to work with them, not my words, just to work with people. So I'm trying to figure out how I can go back and move staff and maybe get some PTOs going with my principal, and we can think about ways to get a nucleus of people to work with and then move forward and make a difference with changing that traditional to really working with kids.
The one thing I'm going to say, because we've talked a lot about Heidi being reflective, but I think Mike's an incredibly reflective administrator as well. And I really appreciate the times when Ted stopped him and just said one thing, and Mike went on about reflecting about what he was asking and the way he was asking it. No, I get it. Maybe that wasn't the right question. So all throughout the conversation that was going on earlier, I think, Mike, you were doing as much or more reflecting on what was going on and your role in the process as Heidi was doing about what went on in the class that we all observed. So, I appreciate that, and I give you a lot of credit for sitting
Thanks.
there and being willing to share with all of us your
It's a
reflective
different, and I would recommend it to other folks because it's different, I think. When you're looking from the outside in, when you're right here in the chair, next to the pros, Yeah.
And that's what my takeaway was how do I replicate a process that you just went through for myself to grow? I was thinking about that. What are some ways I can manage that in my own building in my own time? So, and I haven't got an answer. That's just where I'm at, is how would I replicate that learning opportunity?
So one of the takeaways for me is it kind of goes back to Deborah's comment about the parallel between what happens in classrooms and what happens in this classroom. And the idea that we really are becoming a learning organization, and that the learning isn't just about the kids, that everybody is involved in that process. And I think that frees us up to not have to be experts in any one thing, but always learning more together.